When most people think about wildlife, our minds drift to faraway remote locations like Alaska or Africa. However, wild animals can be found all around us. Take this bush for example. It may not look like much, but the creatures that live here lead just as primitive and dramatic lives as those in the African plains. This European hornet has captured a mud dauber wasp and is meticulously feeding on it. With the head removed, the scent is released into the air. Before long, a swarm of scavenging gnats flies in to try and take what they can. Another example is this family of gray squirrels playing in a beech tree. Or this bugling bull elk, which, surprisingly enough, was filmed in Pennsylvania. Moments like these can be found in nearby state parks, wildlife refuges, local public parks, or even your own backyard. Believe it or not, you don't have to travel far from home in order to find wildlife. You just need to know when, where, and how to look for these amazing animals. Our eyes are one of the most important tools when searching for wildlife. However, the human eye can only go so far. So I always find it useful to carry a pair of binoculars. Most creatures in the wild are cautious around humans and won't let you get too close. So binoculars will allow you to get a closer look at the animal while not disturbing them. They can also help you properly identify it. You can find some fairly good quality binoculars for under $20. Don't be discouraged from looking for wildlife because of money. I've been able to see some incredible creatures and wild moments with very inexpensive gear. Learning to identify the various plant and animal species in your area is a very useful skill. A field guide is always a good reference to have out in the field and is something I carry with me almost everywhere. You can find some pretty good ones at a bookstore or online. I've always found it useful to read through your field guide ahead of time, familiarizing yourself with your local wildlife. While researching, I often find a particular species that captures my attention. I call this a target species. For our example, we'll choose the famous bald eagle. Your next step is to research. This can be done through books, documentaries, or online sources. There are 3 important details of any animal that you must learn in order to be able to find them: their range, habitat, and activity. First, let's look at the range. An animal's range is the region on Earth where the species is found. The range of the bald eagle spans across North America, from Mexico north to Alaska, and the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast. Habitat is the next thing to look for. An animal's habitat are places where they live within their range. Habitat is oftentimes synonymous with diet. In the bald eagle's case, they feed on fish, waterfowl, and other aquatic creatures. Because of this, eagles are found in a variety of aquatic habitats, such as marsh, swamp, river, lake, and reservoir. Bald eagles also need trees in order to construct their nest, so a marshland with some timber, or a forested lake, would be ideal eagle habitat. Finally, let's look at activity, which is an extremely important detail while searching for wildlife. Activity means what time of day and the year this creature is most active. In the bald eagle's case, they are a diurnal species like us, meaning that they are active during the day. The eagles can be found year-round throughout most of their range. Breeding seasons are the time when an animal is most active. For the eagle, this takes place from January to early March, at least in New Jersey. This may vary depending on what part of the country you live in. Once you've found these 3 things, find a spot near you, and then you're ready to head out. When searching for wildlife, we usually just use our eyes. However, it's good to try and give your other senses a try, just like the creatures you'll be pursuing. Many animals will make sounds in order to communicate with one another and to warn of danger. Learning these calls and the meanings behind them can be a useful skill, especially when you're searching for vocal creatures, such as the bald eagle. Now, you don't have to wear camouflage like I do, but it is useful to wear duller colored clothing, stuff that kind of matches the trees, grasses, and plants in your area. This will help you to not stand out as much. It's also important to use clothing that doesn't make a lot of noise when you're moving around. If you're moving around and a creature notices you or hears a twig snap, it's best to stop and wait for the animal to look away. Finding a specific spot can be difficult. The internet can be a very useful resource, however, I found it best to just get out there and explore. A good wildlife spot could be many things, such as a den, water source, or spot with abundant food supply. Back in May, I filmed some red fox kits at a den I found in the woods. I sat there early in the morning for hours, and eventually was able to film these adorable little kits. Remember, if you come across a den or a nest, be sure not to get too close, and don't stick around for too long. This could cause some stress on the animals. Scent is another incredibly important aspect that most people overlook. Most of the creatures out in the wild use their sense of smell to detect predators and even communicate with each other. The most important thing I learned out in the field for tracking down wildlife is to learn which way the wind is blowing, to see if it is carrying your scent toward or away from the animal. The most important thing is you want to stay downwind, which means that the wind is blowing in your face rather than on your back. Learning the many different tracks and signs out in the wild is another incredibly important skill. Oftentimes, we won't see an animal when we're out in the field, but we will see signs of them. Through wild lands, animals leave behind various signs such as tracks, scat, and scrapes. A tracking field guide is something I almost always carry out with me when exploring. An animal's tracks can give you a detailed look into the animal's life. Things like their whereabouts and habits can all be learned by studying an animal's tracks. Finding fresh tracks in the wild will better your chances of finding said creature. One way to find out if a track is fresh or not is to step right next to it and look at the similarities. If the animal track is as deep and defined as yours, that means that the track is fresh. For our example, it can be difficult since eagles don't usually come to the ground, so you won't find many tracks other than scat and their enormous nests. If you do come across a nest in the wild, like I said before, don't get too close. These eagles are very protective, and when startled will fly away from the nest, leaving their eggs or young unprotected from the elements. In my experience, the best way to find out if you're in eagle territory is to keep your ears open. You'll most likely hear one of these creatures before you see them. The final thing I want to point out is that you may not always find your target species, but you will come across some other fascinating creatures and moments. Getting out into nature is beneficial to our mental and physical health, and can result in some fascinating experiences. Even in a heavily urbanized state like New Jersey, you can find some wild places, from local parks to wildlife refuges, and even your own backyard. There's tons of places to find wildlife. Research what type of habitats are in your area, and as always, be prepared and exercise caution, since nature can be unpredictable. Be sure not to litter, and treat all wildlife with respect. Another thing that I find important is to not be discouraged by the kind of gear that you can afford or where you live. I usually have used very cheap gear, especially starting out when I was making that Hidden Wilderness movie. A lot of that was fairly cheap camera gear. I had a cheap pair of binoculars that wasn't too great, but it did the job. And a lot of places I find are public land, stuff around here, the Highlands region of New Jersey, here in Boonton, some places in Sussex. New Jersey is a crazy state, and I didn't realize that until I really started exploring it. And the way I think of it is that if there's a lot of wildlife here, then there has to be wildlife everywhere. And I've seen it in different places. Maryland, I've been to Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Florida. No matter where you live, there's probably a great abundance of wildlife. Just different kinds. We may not have big snow-capped mountains and caribou and grizzly bears, but we have a lot of other amazing creatures. Each state has its own wonderful wildlife to offer. So I'd recommend, no matter where you live, just get out there and explore. You'll be truly amazed at all the stuff you can find. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe. I'll see you next time.